Trump has made good use of the slogan he stole from Ronald Reagan, "Make America Great Again," and it's sometimes difficult to understand what he means by that. He certainly no part of his use of the slogan involves trying to understand what made America great in the first place. But with recent some of the recent statements, including a bit before the election and after the election. It seems like maybe he means just greater, territorially, as in bigger. He's talked about potentially taking over Greenland, taking back the Panama Canal, and he's talked about Canada maybe becoming the 51st state. Um, Now there's a lot already going on in that direction, and in order to try to understand that, we have back after a while on this channel a real Canadian and maybe future American, Nicolas Krusek. Hey, Nicholas.
Hey,
Um,
Razi.
s- so this goes back in some ways. This goes back as far as you're concerned to some stuff that happened back in 2019 with Trump and Trudeau. Do you want to start off with that?
Yeah, let's take our viewers back to a NATO summit that happened back in 2019, where Trump and Trudeau met. This was during Trump's first presidency. And in the aftermath, Trudeau was caught on a hot mic talking to Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron and speaking disparagingly of Trump. At the time, this was brought to Trump's attention, and if you recall that Trump at that time described Trudeau as two-faced. So there's already a little bit of history of tension, of disagreeable tension between the two leaders. Essentially, ever since then, Trudeau has been on Trump's hit list. Okay, now fast forward to the present. The Canadian Liberal Party is in disarray. Trudeau's Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, resigned last month, publicly resigned. There's quite a bit of commotion and confusion surrounding that. And generally, Trudeau is very low in the polls. He announced his resignation a few weeks ago. We had a discussion with James about that. And so Trump has been taking advantage of Trudeau's weakness, his weakness in the eyes of Canadian, and the general weak political situation in Canada to make various taunts about, first of all, describing Trudeau as the governor of Canada, Canada as the 51st state. And now let me say at the outset, I I'm not inclined to take anything Trump says at face value. Don't misunderstand me. I don't mean to say that I don't take what he says seriously. I take what he says very seriously. But I always assume there's some sort of deeper underlying motivation than what appears on the surface. And right now, he definitely seems to be taking advantage of the weakness of the Canadian political situation and Canada's political leadership.
So, I mean, somebody in the chat, Davy Boy mentions a state larger than the U.S. at the moment. Clever. Yeah, it's. I don't know exactly, how he imagines this might work. First of all, I would think if Canada became part of the United States, it would be not one new state, but at least 12, 13. How many provinces do you
13.
have?
We have 10 provinces and 3 territories. So it would be the 51st through 63rd states, assuming that we kept the same division.
Yeah, yeah. But the thing is with Trump, sometimes you think, maybe he's kind of trolling, or maybe he's kind of, it, whatever he's saying is a negotiation starting point because he is big on, the art of the deal. But yeah, I did. He has been asked about it. There have been follow-ups, and he does seem like he intends to change the relationship between the U.S. and Canada from what it is now into something else, and what exactly that is again something we're gonna find out. So yeah, tariffs are already coming, right?
Tariffs are coming. Well, let me say one more thing about this idea of a U.S.-Canada merger. So, first of all, I don't see that as being in anybody's best interest. From the U.S. point of view, if Canada were to actually join the U.S., you'd have the bluest state imaginable up to the north. I mean, there'd be no chance of Trump ever being reelected, of a Republican government ever being reelected. So it simply wouldn't happen from that point of view. Also, from Canada's point of view, now, in a rare show of unanimity, all of the leaders of Canada's major parties have basically responded to this 51st state idea by saying it would never happen, right? Trudeau has said that, Jagmeet Singh of the NDP, even Pierre Poilievre of the Conservative Party has said Canada does not, under any circumstance, want to join the US. An interesting question in this connection is what would most Canadians think, or what would the average Canadian think about this? And by no means can you take my view to be representative of the majority of Canadians or average Canadians or whoever it is. I think it can be difficult to differentiate the actual views of Canadians with the views that our political and intellectual elites tend to impose upon us. So it's certainly true that Canadians can have a certain nationalistic streak. Like right now, the Canadian news media is very much holding up Trump as the villain here, as and holding up the United States more generally as a kind of existential threat to Canada. And so you're rallying a kind of nationalistic spirit, a kind of pro-Canadian spirit. Okay, well, let's go back 3 years when our very same intellectual and media and political elites were telling us that Canada is this horrible colonialist power, guilty of genocide against its native people. You remember that? Do you remember when we were all flying our flags at half-mast and talking about canceling Canada Day because of some alleged mass graves discovered, which have, not a single body has ever been exhumed, not a single mass grave has ever been found. So Canadians are very fickle in this way that when our leaders tell us to spit in our own faces and to hate our own country, a lot of Canadians will do that. When they tell us to be patriotic and to love our country, Canadians will go along with that. So you can never predict what direction the public will go in.
Thank you, Christian, for the super chat. Christian says, Nicholas, what is your stance on MAID? I saw, I don't know what this is. I assume you do.
Oh, medical assistance in dying.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
well,
Wait, let me read the rest of the super chat. I saw the interview with Kelsey Shireen at Trigonometry. I wonder how much is true. Constantine and Francis were very silent and in shock. I was horrified.
okay, I'm not sure what the full context here is, but the question was about MAID, that's medical assistance in dying. It's basically the idea that if you're at a certain age and your health is deteriorating, you should have the right to decide to get a doctor to assist you in suicide. Which, if we accept that people have a right to life, a right to liberty, a right to possession of one's own person, I think it makes perfect sense that provided that certain safeguards are in place to protect people who are perhaps mentally unfit to make a decision or vulnerable in some ways. There are plenty of situations where a person might be in such pain or deteriorating so rapidly that they might want to put an end to their life. And I think Canada has wisely made some steps in that direction in making that possible.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of how it works in Canada, but I on the matter, as a principle, I completely agree.
On principle, yeah.
Somebody in the chat says Canadians have no sense of identity. Well, I don't know what exactly that means, but I've always found, I've been to Canada a few times, and even from afar, I found Canadians in general, it's a culture that is proud of it's a patriotic culture. Am I getting the wrong impression?
So one word that describes Canadians in my mind is benevolent. There's definitely a sense of benevolence, definitely a sense of generosity to Canadians, which unfortunately can sometimes be misguided or take wrong directions. See our bloated welfare state, our enormous, our socialized medicine. There's this feeling that, well, as Canadians, we have to take care of each other, watch out, be thy brother's keeper, all that sort of thing, which, of course, in actual political practice, when this means letting the state take over our educational institutions, our medical institutions, etc., it simply doesn't work. So it's both a blessing and a curse, the fact that Canadians have this overwhelming benevolence and sense of goodwill towards each other. It can be directed in the wrong way.
I saw maybe a week or two ago Trump answering a question. I think it was in a press conference about the question was something like, "You've said you're not ruling out military action or military or economic force when it comes to taking over Greenland, which he's spoken about, and the Panama Canal. Are you ruling it out when it comes to Canada?" And he said yes, which was both good to hear, but also troubling, in the sense that he's sticking by not ruling it out in the case of Greenland. I think Greenland and Panama, maybe we'll talk about it a little bit. I think those are very different cases. Well, I'll just say why. I think in Greenland, it's a pure act of aggression on the part of the U.S. Even if there's any reason to want that territory. The idea that you're not, by saying I'm not ruling out military action, that is an act of aggression because that is a threat. So I think that's very different from Panama, where of course the canal was built by America. Panama, there are deals that Panama violates from time to time, and there has already been a war over this, and I don't understand how the U.S. is putting up with that crap. So I think those are very different situations. But what do you think generally of Trump's um, desire seemingly to expand the U.S. territorially in different ways and in different places?
I don't see any danger of military aggression against Canada. It's true that Canada is a militarily weaker country than the United States and also economically weaker. We have about a tenth the population, well, roughly a tenth the population, and the US has more than 10 times our GDP. Also add to that the fact that Canada doesn't have nuclear weapons. So we're definitely in a weaker position, but it's not military intervention that I'm worried about. It's really more the economic war. And that, of course, leads us to this question of the tariffs. So Trump has said, I think even within the past day or two, when he was sworn in and signing a flurry of executive orders to do with immigration and other topics, he did say that very likely February 1st, so that's next week, that's a little over a week from today, he's strongly considering 25% tariffs across the board on both Canada and Mexico. Let me say this will be economically devastating for Canada. There's simply no way around that. 25% tariffs. I mean, Canada, U.S. is by every means our largest trading partner, and it'll harm the United States as well. It'll definitely harm the United States economy, but it'll harm Canada quite a bit more. And I'm sure that President Trump is very well aware of it. What's even worse is that this is actually causing a lot of division and a lot of strife within Canada. So, for example, in the past few days, there was a meeting of all the first ministers, Trudeau, and the leaders of the various provinces and territories, with one notable exception that I'll mention in a moment. They met to discuss how they were going to retaliate against Trump's tariffs. Canada's going to retaliate. We talk about the mouse that roared. Canada's going to retaliate, and Trudeau said, no form of retaliation is off the table. Dollar for dollar, we're going to match any tariffs, any economic sanctions that the U.S. puts upon us. And of course, that in itself, even the retaliation is going to harm Canada more than it harms the U.S. because right now we export so much energy, so much oil and natural gas to the United States, not to mention automobiles from Alberta and also automobiles and various parts from Ontario and from Quebec. So, and now there's a lot of discussion of taking U.S. food out of our groceries, U.S. liquor out of our liquor stores, which is, of course, going to mean that prices are going to go higher for Canadians. So I do not see this as ending well for Canada in any possible respect.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's not going to end well for America. And who gets who is it going to harm more is a question I never understand. Whenever people say, "Oh, they have more to lose than we do," like you're saying you're okay with losing as long as the other side loses more. And I'm wondering if I don't know if he does actually do this, and he said tariffs. He loves that word; it's his favorite word, or whatever. And I'm wondering if doing this early on and seeing the impact, which will be negative on America, is something that actually might get Trump to walk back his love of tariffs, or at least his acting on his love of tariffs.
I doubt it. I doubt it. First of all, remember that America has a much larger population and a much larger GDP, even a much larger per capita GDP than Canada. So whatever harm this will do to various sectors, various industries in the United States, it'll be probably noticeable, but certainly the consequences won't be as bad as they will be for Canada. I think Trump will probably ignore the consequences and forge ahead. But then the question is, what are the consequences going to be for Canada? So right now, I mentioned there was this first ministers meeting where there was talk of retaliation against Trump's tariff. Now, the one minister who was conspicuously absent from this meeting was Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, conservative premier of Alberta, who uh, she visited Mar-a-Lago last week to actually meet with Trump in person. You may have seen some of the photographs of the two of them together. In the past few days, she was in Washington to attend the inauguration of Donald Trump. Now, this has caused a lot of controversy within the Canadian media and among Canadian politicians. On the one hand, she's being accused of being a traitor, of kissing up to Donald Trump, of not uh, adhering to the principle of Canadian unity, putting her own province of Alberta above Canada. I think all of that is complete nonsense. I think, first of all, I think she's a very good premier. I think she's a smart lady. You know, she was an intern with the Fraser Institute, which is a kind of pro free market, pro capitalist think tank. She understands economics better than certainly Trudeau and any of his cronies. Uh, and I think we have to appreciate just how much courage it must take for her to stand alone against Trudeau, against all of her colleagues, even against her conservative colleagues like Doug Ford from Ontario, Scott Moe from Saskatchewan. She's been trying to negotiate with Trump, negotiate with other influential people, lawmakers in the United States. She's trying to start a conversation about securing our borders, doing something about raising our NATO defense spending, which is something that Trump has criticized in the past, saying that Canada isn't pulling its own weight, that we're basically free riding on the United States as a sort of our defense south of the border. She's trying to resolve all of these different issues. And at the same time, she's being attacked within her own country, attacked by her prime minister, by her fellow premiers. So she's definitely not in an enviable position here.
Yeah, when you were saying, if Canada becomes a state, it will always be a blue state, and the different provinces will be blue. My first thought was Alberta is probably the exception to that. They that's where the
And
Republican.
maybe Saskatchewan, yeah, the
I
prairie
mean,
provinces.
yeah, Alberta is oil country basically. I'm sure they love the idea of drill baby drill, right? And
Yes, yes, and that's part of the problem here. So, over the past decade that Trudeau has been in power, he and the NDP, the New Democratic Party, have consistently opposed the building of pipelines. They've consistently opposed Alberta, which is a very natural resource rich, very energy rich province, from exporting its liquid natural gas and oil to Japan, to various countries in Europe. The reason that Canada is in such a vulnerable position economically is because of liberal incompetence and mismanagement. Because Trudeau and his merry cabinet of eco-terrorists have made it impossible for Canada to be which is such a country so rich in natural resources, to be independent, to not be so dependent on the U.S. market, for one thing. Like right now, we could easily be shipping resources to South America, to Asia, to various European countries. Instead, we're so dependent on the American market. That's precisely what makes us so vulnerable to Trump's tariff threats.
yeah, I mean, here in Europe, we don't need your oil. We get it from Russia. We're good. But yeah, it's a shame that this is. But I think this also will probably change in Canada as well, right? I want to get to the super chats, but I will ask you this first, and I'm sure we're gonna cover it in whole episodes in the future. But there is an election coming soon, and do you want to give us kind of just a general idea of where Canadian politics is, what you're expecting, if you want to make a projection on what's going to happen in that election.
Where Canadian politics is in the toilet. So at the moment, Trudeau has suspended Parliament at least until the end of March, as a because he realizes that his party is very low in the polls. The Conservatives under Poilievre have been doing quite strongly lately, and of course, the one thing that Trudeau and his NDP boyfriend Jagmeet Singh don't want is to lose power, to allow power to go to the Conservatives. So they're holding on as long as they possibly can. We don't know exactly what's going to happen when Parliament resumes in March. One difference between Canada and the United States. In the United States, they have an election every 4 years. In Canada, it's usually every 4 years, but according to the law, it's a maximum of 5 years. And so I don't know what possible shenanigans the Liberals and the New Democratic Party could come up with in the spring, but it's entirely possible that the election could be delayed as late as the fall of 2026. That's an absolute worst case scenario, that the election could be postponed as far as another year and a half, which there would probably have to be some extraordinary circumstances. It's entirely possible that Trudeau could use a tariff war with the US, as you know, we're in a state of emergency and therefore we can't have an election when we're in the middle of a trade war with the US. I wouldn't put it past Trudeau to use this as a kind of a bargaining chip to try to hold on to his power even longer.
Yeah, that's very similar to the UK, where officially they have to happen every 5 years, but they usually happen more frequently. Although I do think in Canada, there are often occasions where basically the prime minister thinks he's going to win an election if it happens now, so he calls that election, right?
Which is what he did in 2021. That's what Trudeau did in 21. Yeah.
Yeah. And what he, absolutely wouldn't do now if because yeah, it doesn't look like he's going to win. Thank you, Roland, for the super chat. Roland says, "Let's hope Trump never finds out Canada is a monarchy. He might end up eyeing the throne." Yes, I mean the throne is this side of the pond, but you know, yeah, why stop at Canada? And thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat, and thank you, Jeff, for the super chat in Canadian dollars, tariff free. I mean, we're in the UK. I think it's tariff free, right?
So far, we'll have
Yeah.
to wait and see.
Um, any any reason for optimism here in specifically U.S.-Canada relations with Trump and generally with the new president?
I'd like to see an election as soon as possible. I'd like to see, ideally, the ideal outcome would be a conservative majority under Pierre Poilievre, who very, very smart guy, good principles, basically a pro-free market, pro-capitalist. One possible glimmer of hope is that many of you will recall that both Jordan Peterson and Elon Musk enthusiastically supported Trump in the most recent U.S. election. Both Peterson and Musk have endorsed Poilievre for Prime Minister of Canada. I'm hoping that that might bode well for future relations between Poilievre and Trump, that they might actually be able to deal with. It's clear that Trump does not respect Trudeau. And I think a lot of Trump's current attacks against Canada are probably personally directed at Trudeau himself. I'm hoping that with a competent statesman, someone who understands economics in power in Canada, he might be able to deal with Trump, negotiate with Trump on his own terms. That's a really a best case scenario. The problem here, of course, is that Poilievre very much has the media against him. The media tend to be more left leaning, more socialist. A large section of the Canadian populace against him, who can't possibly countenance anything to do with a free market or capitalism. So he's really got an uphill battle with him. But right now, I think he's our best hope.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't respect Trudeau. I think he referred to him as the governor of Canada, right? That's
Yes.
tongue in cheek. But many of us don't respect Trudeau. We don't necessarily think that means the U.S. should take over Canada. Ian says in the chat, oil and cattle. This is in relation to Alberta. Oil and cattle. It's the Texas of Canada. Um, well. I've been to Texas. I haven't been to Alberta, but I've seen the weather. There are some differences. Um, yeah, Ian says I grew up surrounded by rednecks in rural Alberta. Yeah, I'm freezing just thinking about that. Uh, Davy Boy says I grew up in North York, a part of Toronto. Yeah, we have more Canadians than I thought in the chat, which is
Awesome.
good to know. And yeah, maybe you will get to vote in the 2028 US elections. Half kidding, but anyway, yeah. All right. Any parting thoughts, Nicholas? And again, I'm sure we will cover Canada, of course, if there is an election, we'll cover that closely, and I'm sure we'll cover Canada anyway soon.
Well,
But yeah,
parting thoughts. I certainly look forward to coming back maybe over the next month. I'd certainly like to do a discussion of who's going to replace Trudeau, particularly focusing on Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney, two figures that we really have to be very wary of here in Canada. And at some point, I'd like to do an episode devoted to Pierre Poilievre. Who is he? What is his background? What are his convictions? And so I
when
look forward to coming back with some more Canadian updates in the
uh,
weeks to come.
when you say who's going to replace Trudeau, the first two names you mentioned
Liberal,
are
they're liberal.
oh, so who's going to replace as the leader? Oh yeah, because he's not
Who's
running.
going to
So who's
replace
going to be
Trudeau as
there?
leader of the Liberal Party and hopefully temporary interim prime minister until we can get an election and a conservative victory?
Oh, okay. So that is the situation. Like he is actually going to leave office before the election, rather than step down after the election. For
No,
whatever.
Trudeau has announced that he would resign, presumably after Parliament resumes. There will be a no confidence motion against Trudeau's government. He'll step down and somebody will take his place. And then there will be an election within, I don't know, 40 to 50 days after that. So at best, probably sometime in May.
All right. Well, then, yeah, there is a lot more to
So
talk
whoever
about.
replaces Trudeau can look forward to reigning for, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks, which is bad enough, but let's just get it over with and move on.
Unless they do an incredible job and end up winning by landslide. But in any case, we will cover it either way. Thanks, Nicholas. Any Where can people find you and your work?
Well, I've got a YouTube channel with a couple of videos, including my Ocon talk from 2 years ago. Also, if you haven't seen it yet, check out my Ocon talk from last year, which is on the ARI YouTube channel. That's the one on Goethe's Faust.
And I don't know if we'll have time to put a link in the live chat, but there will be a link to those in the description.
Thanks.
Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And the reality show starts in a couple minutes. We'll see you there.
Thanks, Razi.